Hi guys, welcome. Let's study some Qigong together. So we got some questions. The first one is from HimFan0805. Mr. Chan, loving the new Qigong videos. Thank you. Quick questions on lineage. Some of the terminologies and concepts seem similar to the energy arts of Bruce Francis. Have any of your teachers worked with that lineage, or is this a case of two similar but unrelated Daoist lineage coming out of China? I'm going to have to say the latter. I'm 100% sure none of my teachers work with Mr. Francis. My first teacher was Sifu Mike Smith. He studied Qigong with many people, and he inherited a Chinese medicine tradition. And my second teacher was Professor Zheng Shifeng, who was one of the head professors of Beijing for Chinese medicine. He studied medical Qigong there. He also studied with the founder of each one, for each one. So no, it's a different lineage. And then my last teacher and mentor for Qigong was the Heaven Mountain tradition from Master Steve Smith, who was the chosen inheritor of Fukien. And Fukien was a grand master of a Heaven Mountain lineage. And of all that, the only art I practice right now is the Heaven Mountain lineage. And the history of that, I'm going to have to assume is not related to Bruce Francis. Well, actually, it's all related because it's all Daoism, and the oldest proto-Daoist tradition is the Mountain Hermit tradition in the early Zhou dynasty of Neiyi. And from there, it slowly started to spread. And by the time it got to about the Ming dynasty, it was estimated there's 500 different sects of Daoism. So how can we even know which one's related, right? It'd be impossible to find out. But just to walk you through the history, since you're asking about history, the earliest spirituality in China was in the Shang and Zhai dynasty. This is during the hunter-gatherer period, before even agriculture, if I remember correctly. And it wasn't even Daoism at all. It was shamanism. So there are a lot of common features with other shamanistic practice around the globe. They were doing psychedelics. There was a lot of rituals, a lot of dance, human sacrifice, fortune telling, all sorts of stuff, right? But the archaeology find in that is incomplete because it's so long ago. So they're not 100% what they did, but they did find evidence of these elements. One of the many things these shamans were doing is trance. So the theory is, not evidence, there's no evidence for this, but it's the best guess Taoist priests and Taoist scholars seems to have, is that certain people started to study people in trance and they saw a system in it, saw a way to train it. Because these shamans going into trance were not trained. They were just, it was just spontaneously happening to them, right? The medicine man is chosen, not something that you choose, right? So, but they found a way to train it, and that became proto-Dao, or before it was Daoism. So that's in the Shang dynasty. So by the early Zhou dynasty, China, it wasn't even called China yet. It was 6 different states or tribes beating the crap out of each other. There was already agriculture. Rice was invented and farming. So the population started getting bigger around the Yellow River area. And at that time, certain spiritual people were hanging out in the mountains to leave society, to get away from the red dust and the noise. And these people were meditating based on what we talked about earlier. And in archaeology, they found a scripture written by these dudes, and it's called the Neiyi, which is now the oldest Taoist scripture. But at that point in history, it wasn't even called Taoism. But it's the earliest Taoist practice we can find. And it was based on sitting and merging practices. It was based on no method, no stages, no doing, no techniques. And like ice, you just directly merge into the Tao. And the modern inheritors of that would be like Zen Sazen, Tibet Dochan, or another good example is sitting and forgetting in Taoism, and also Heaven Mountain tradition. So there's a lot of tradition that still do the original paradigm, conceptual meditation of non-doing, directly merging, right? So that was in the Zhou dynasty. And if you go a little bit later, by the Han dynasty, it was officially, actually by the Qin dynasty, it was already officially called China. It became a country. And then by the Han dynasty, the Chinese, now we can officially call it Chinese, It was at that time that Taoist practice evolved to the point where it became doing practices. And the modern inheritors of this is the famous Loi Dan, or internal alchemy, right? So these is the same as the original Taoism. They both merge into the Tao. The difference is the original way, you just directly merge. Whereas in the later Han Dynasty Taoism, it's like a stage by stage, technique by technique process. So it's indirect. It's a ladder you have to climb, right? It doesn't mean it's no good. It's the same destination. What it does mean is people have different temperaments. Some people can't just directly merge. I mean, it would be awesome if everyone could, right? So different styles and different systems for different folks. So that would be in the Han Dynasty period. And then later in the Han Dynasty, Buddhism was really spreading really big in China. So at that point, the Han Dynasty Daoists started to build temples, wear hats, wear uniforms, and start doing public service. So officially, Daoism becomes a religion. But before that point, it was never a religion. So the public service they did was usually the I Ching, or the Chinese oracle fortune telling, praying, rituals for the dead, allowing the public to come in and worship the gods, all this stuff, right? And that's what Daoism become a religion. But everything I just said with the fortune telling, the rituals, the worshiping of the gods, all this stuff is actually originally not from Daoism. If you remember what we talked about a little bit earlier, in the way before there was the Zhou dynasty, in the Shangzai dynasty with the Wu shamans, all these things in Han Dynasty about fortune telling, worship, and rituals, they were actually inherited. They were inheriting the Wu shaman ritualistic stuff, the shamanistic stuff. So what we see in religious Taoism is actually not invented by the Taoists. They inherited the Wu shaman practices, developed it further, modified it, right? A lot of people don't know this, right? This is important because this kind of stuff exists before Chinese was called Chinese, before China was called China. It is actually inherited from the shamanistic practice. The actual Taoist practice, the earliest one, as you recall what we talked about earlier, is really based on meditation and merging. And that has never changed. The only thing that changes, it changed from non-doing to doing. And then if we go a little bit more modern, then it gets a little bit depressing. We hit the Qing dynasty, and then later on we hit the communist area where the spiritual esoteric part of the practice, which is 80% of the practice, the merging process we talked about earlier, was kind of taken away on purpose by the government. And then they left the physical energy boosting part, basically exercise. And then they gave it a new name called Qi Gong. So when you said your original question, does the lineage merge, is like, it is. If you look at the history I just laid out, the way it bleed down all the way from the Shang dynasty, it is a very complex thing. Taoism is not one thing. In fact, in the West, they'll say, oh, Taoism is either a religion or a philosophy. In both cases, it is wrong. The bones of Taoism was never a religion until the later Han dynasty, just so they can compete with Buddhism. It was really a public service. Before that, the bones of Taoism was Han Dynasty doing practice of internal alchemy, and before that, it was the Zhou Dynasty non-doing merging process. In neither case, the main emphasis, rather is doing or not doing, was to merge with the Tao. What that means is Taoism, at its core, is a mystical practice for spiritual purposes. It was never meant to be a religion. So the first Western assumption written by scholars in the 50s and 60s is not actually accurate or true. The second thing that is usually superimposed is that, oh, it's from the 100 schools of thought in the Zhou dynasty, and Taoism is a philosophy. Taoism never was and never will be a philosophy. That's a modern projection. In the oral tradition of practitioners, even in my very first class 30-something years ago, the first thing my teacher said to me is, Taoism always was a practitioner tradition. They practiced to merge, to experience things. It was never about just talking. It was never about philosophy, right? In fact, if you read the oldest scripture right now, the Nei Yi, and I keep saying this, there's a great book about the Nei Yi called Original Tao, best translation in English right now by Dr. Harold Roth of Brown's University, great scholar. And I quote in AE, it says, can you not use the oracle and can tell good fortune from bad? Another saying in AE that he directly said, if you're connected with the Qi and the Qi comes down, you can directly get counsel from it. That's a paraphrase, not direct quote. So what does that actually mean? That you don't need fortune telling? Because that was very, very common from the ancient time to modern time in Chinese society. That, if you have a problem, you go do your I Ching fortune telling practices. And the Neji is like, look, if you're connected, if you got Wi-Fi, if you're emerging, you don't need the oracle, you don't need any fortune telling. And you should know good fortune from bad. That's the first hint. The second hint they gave is, if you're one with the Qi, then automatically you can take counsel from it. Now, what does that mean? So you can take that literally, or you can take it from a psychology point of view. I'm going to talk about it from a psychology point of view because soften up the resistance of the woo-woo, right? Okay, Albert Einstein, smart guy, everyone knows, one of his secret tricks he said is for coming up with an idea when he can't find a solution is to hold something and then right before he drops, he catches it while he's falling asleep. So between the sleep state and between the dream state, when he's hanging out around there, he find that his ability to find solution was amazing. And he said intuition is more important than knowledge and intellectual capacity, your intuitive mind. And how do you do that? Because your conscious mind is consciously gathering data to figure things out, to find a solution to your problems. But your intuition just knows. But how do you tap into it? So Einstein's like, well, it's easy. You just kind of ask the question sincerely, get into the between dream and wake state, fall asleep, hold on to an object. So when it falls, you hold on to it and wake back up. And right away, you know the solution. That kind of reporting trick, psychologically, is the same as what a lot of artists around the world report. And that is, I don't know how I paint that. I didn't know how I wrote that. It's almost as if I was the vessel and it came through me. Or as the great psychologist Carl Jung said, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. It comes into you. It controls you. Blah, blah, blah. So that's a poetic way in psychology and historically and artistically for people to describe the intuitive mind. And nobody knows how we tap into it, right? Or in Lao Tzu, it will say, can you be patient, relax, and let the mud settle into your center? Let the mud settle, and therefore you have clarity. So all these ways are ways to talk about intuition, and most people have no argument about it, right? But to take it one step farther, when people talk about intuition in a way that's metaphorical, like it's not real, it's just a metaphor, that stuff comes into you, it controls you, and you're just a vessel. That artists around the world always say, and as psychologists say, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. They grab onto you. So we're looking at that metaphorically to describe this miracle called intuition. But in Neiyi, when it says you take counsel from it, is suggesting that this idea that is coming down and giving you answer is no longer a metaphor, but is taking it literally. Like if you meditate and open up, stuff comes down, you got Wi-Fi. It's like you're connected to a quantum computer. That is the idea, right? Where in Hinduism, they're called Akasha records. That's pretty famous in the New Age industry, but traditionally it wasn't called a Akasha record. It was just Akasha. And I'm not qualified to go into Hinduism, but I'm just saying it has the same pointing as Daoism. That when you open up, your intuition open up in your heart and your gut. You receive the energy and you just somehow know the answer. So that is how Daoism got mistaken later on as philosophy. But it was never a philosophy. Philosophy takes too long. It's much too slow for real crisis. Intuition is instantaneous. It works even in sword fighting, as the samurai has found out. That's why the samurais meditated so much. Anyways, I'm babbling off this simple question, but I just want to say, when people ask about lineages in China, it's actually not that simple. It's all over the place because it's such an old country, right? So when you're learning, at least when I'm learning, I shouldn't speak for anybody, I don't really trace lineages till I find what I want to practice. And I find what I want to practice not based on how it looks, not based on the benefits that is being advertised, but rather I taste it. I go for a taste test. I try it, I practice it for a few months, and if it's a genuine practice, I'll feel the stuff. For those that are familiar with my story, I was really, really, really sick, and this stuff completely cured me. I would not stick around if something doesn't cure me just because it has a nice resume or a nice lineage, right? So this is very important. That's why Mo, the famous founder of Zen of Shaolin Temple, he said, those who come to the Dharma come with great suffering. So almost dying was the best thing that happened to me, because if I wasn't seriously ill, I wouldn't have practiced that hard. So when you're looking at lineages, it's important, at least from the Chinese tradition, to understand that it's not a straight line. It is all over the place. It's actually pretty confusing, and not enough evidence from science yet. They're trying to dig up as much things as they can in anthropology, but hopefully they'll have some new finds. So the best recommendation I have for young people when they're looking for a lineage is that, do your historical research later, but for now, practice the stuff and see if you can absorb the benefits. Anyways, I'm babbling, so I'll leave you guys with that. As for announcement, I'm happy to say that the sitting practice, lesson 5 or 6, is already in the student library. It's very specifically designed for battling anxiety and depression. It's the exact practice I used 5 years ago to cure myself, and I'm sharing it. It's in the student library, which is part of the Daoist community program on my website. That program comes with one time a week a live class, also with live Q&A, guided qigong meditation. It comes with a free student forum where I get a chance to talk to everybody. And it comes with the library, which has all the classes. So if you miss a live stream class, you can binge watch all the past classes. I like talking to people live. I mean, this podcast is fun, but I like talking to my students live a lot more so I can give them personalized coaching. Anyways, have a good week, guys. See you next time.